Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the History of Fan Anime. I'm your host, William Chow, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about some FAQs and some information on the early internet. Okay, so a lot of people have been sort of asking questions about, well, there's always been this thing called the internet. What kind of information do you get off of the internet? Okay, or the so-called internet at the beginning. So, before I begin, just want to remind everyone to go down below, click like, and click subscribe, and you maybe throw out a comment or two because it really helps the YouTube algorithm, work, based on my users interacting. Okay. Also, if you like to support me and you like the particular episodes, I also have the different ways that you can support me on PayPal or on Patreon, as well as the like button below that said you can put a little tip on there as well. Okay, but again, not necessary. But there is some extra content available, which I'm now working on. Today's topic, of course, is this thing called the what kind of information can you get on the early internet. Okay, what a lot of people used was this thing called news groups. Okay, if you liked a particular topic, let's say for example anime, they would have something under the big huge spider tree of news groups called rec arts. Okay, recreational arts, right? And then this particular subgroup was called anime. They'd probably have a rec arts.star Trek and a rec arts.star Wars, but our particular one they had one for anime. And under this anime, they had different topics as well. But I mean, under the main category, you could post messages about anime. You could ask questions about anime, and people in this community would be able to read that message and be able to answer back. Some news groups, had messages, a couple messages every day. Some news groups had, hundreds of messages every day. But in this particular news group, rec.arts.anime, questions and that kind of stuff sort of came along, and this sort of de facto, I wouldn't say a moderator, but a basically a caretaker, if you will. I guess in the modern term for chats and that kind of stuff, they call them moderators. Came across. His name was Stephen Pearl. Okay, and he put together what they refer to as the actually put it together actually quite a few different lists, right? But this particular one I'm going to go through today is called the anime FAQs, okay, or frequently asked questions. He did have this great sort of all complete sort of FAQ, which had a lot of the really heavily talked about topics, and some of the answers to some of the great questions that were sort of asked in the early 90s, in that sort of era when all these new anime companies started releasing anime. Notably things like Aniego doing their releases in around 92. A lot of the new releases in 95 when A Division and those guys started coming into the play. And and that's sort of when the whole industry started getting off its feet. Anime conventions were just starting to have a rise, some sort of footing, right? I'm referring to the beginning of things like Anime America, Project Acon, and even of course the very infant birth of Anime Expo. Okay. But all that sort of information is sort of in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on to the thing and go through the list with you and sort of go through some of the questions and kind of elaborate on some issues here and points here and there, and then you can see for yourself what kind of questions that kind of popped up, and you can see what they are. Okay, so without further delay, let's begin. All right, so we begin with where we sort of last left off in episode 2, and the next question is. Occasionally in anime, there's these short, round versions of anime characters. They refer to them as the super deformed. And, what are they, and why are Japanese so fond of them? And basically, it's they're referring to the fact that they make these super deformed characters, and they show up in a lot of places, and of course a lot more often, especially in things like a lot of the video games, especially with the Super Robo Battle series and that kind of stuff. And they show up in a whole bunch of various different animes. Of course, they've got the the Ten Little Golf Force, and SD Gundam, of course, Super From Gundam. But yeah, a lot of other things, they have them, and part of it's marketing because then they can sell little figurines and little things like that, which are some more super deformed version of them, so that I guess you can say that, the concept of the things like a bobblehead or a even one of those pop funk things. Those are technically like super deformed guys as well, right? Those are just sort of the more modern editions of this kind of concept. And it's just, part of it is marketing. Some people think it's actually kind of cute that they have these sort of things. And so, hey, well, as long as it sells, that's why people make them. Okay, the next question is there a role-playing game system for the Record of Lotus War? And yes, Record of Lost Wars, did come up as a supplemental campaign for I guess their version of D&D called Sword World. And once they started making the concept or the modules or whatever you want to call them for that, they came out in like books, sort of RPG, like sort of adventure books, novels type of thing, as well as a lot of like this particular thing came from a Computique magazine. Again, primarily focusing on video games and that kind of stuff, more towards the PC end, I guess. But they also featured a lot of articles and sub stories and maps, character sheets, and that kind of stuff, all for that in that thing, and they kind of made it together. And of course, later on, that came to being made into like a video game and that kind of stuff. So all that sort of transpired from that. Okay, the next question. Well, the next actually questions are very similar, so I'll put them together. The question is basically, is there going to be any more Riding Bean, Gunsmith Cats, Bubble Crisis? Because they're all kind of made by the same company, Atomic Umix, right? Character design, of course, done by Kenichi Sonoda. And the answer basically is no, because obviously they're Umix and Muvix basically split, and they no longer wish to cooperate with each other. And of course, the rights are split between the two companies, so they won't make any more of that. Now, of course, later on, with using a different company, different kind of designs, I guess you would say, they made the Bubble Crisis TV series, okay, which is another thing that they kind of made afterwards. Again, that's probably past the scope of this FAQ, but that's something that eventually happened. The next question is actually a two-part one. They basically ask, what is Japanese phone cards and phone books have to do with anime and manga? Well, again, phone cards are basically, back in the days when, before cell phones, basically, in order to use the public, phone, you had to basically have, these phone cards. Of course, over here, when we talk like BC Tel or Bell, you could stick in a nickel or a quarter or that kind of stuff into a phone booth and or a phone public telephone to access and use the telephone, right? This sort of thing got pretty expensive, so what they've done is they basically put it into a card, and at first the cards are pretty plain, but they quickly realized that you can use these cards for promotional purposes. You could actually put company information onto them, and then basically sell a little bit of phone time. Preload the card with like a couple cents or whatever, so that way people can keep this in their wallet. And of course, that also reminds them that hey, maybe it's a sushi shop or whatever. But in the case of anime, you can actually start putting anime figures and that kind of stuff, and anime pictures onto the picture onto the cards. And like I have one for Cream Lemon, when it's the Cream Lemon Lasers box set. There's a phone card in there because one of the things is that Amy was trying to basically give thank you for buying this Cream Lemon box set, and here's a phone card for you as well. And so that's kind of a collectible thing. The second part of it is that this thing called phone books, and the reason they refer to this one is that the monthly or weekly Japanese comics, right? It's, if you think of our Sunday newspapers, we call them the Sunday funnies, right? Maybe in a newspaper might be like 2 pages in a standard newspaper. Well, in Japan, they compile a whole pile of, let's say weekly or monthly or whatever, into a giant, book. Okay, this book is literally the size of a phone book, like a classic phone book. Before the internet, of course, all the people's telephone numbers, residential phone numbers, or van or business phone numbers, are all stored in a very large kind of indexed book. And these mangas, okay, or these monthly, weekly manga books, are about the size of a freaking telephone book. So like literally hundreds of pages, and that would come out every slash month week. And people can read up and catch up on their new chapter of these new stories that are coming out, whether that be like City Hunter, Dragon Ball, Orange Road, Maze Nikake, whatever. They'd be all in these sort of magazines before they compile them into smaller volumes. Okay, so the next question is translated and or English manga available in the USA. So, in the early days, again before the internet and everything kind of stuff, the only place you could really get mangas is in a comic book store because that's the closest thing it's going to be. It's like a comic, right? So you'd go to your local comic book store, and again, you go in there, and at this time, the comic book industry is entirely like a huge amount. I'd probably say like 90%, probably 85%, all dominated by either Marvel or DC. So essentially, it's either going to be your Superman, Spider-Man, X-Men type of titles, right? Which basically dominated that entire comic book industry for the most part. And sure, there's some other stuff that's out there, that wasn't either Marvel comics or DC comics. There was like things like Image, and other little, smaller things like, Comico, for example. They made the Robotech comic. Viz was just starting to get in. They had things like, the Guyver and Area 88 and things like that. They're just starting to get in there. But really, so when you go into these, comic book stores, even most comic book stores had only just a very, very little amount of independent, non, shall I say, traditional comics, which are the Marvels or the DCs, right? And so you go in there, and they should have one or two titles or whatever, and it'd be a large shelf, but only maybe one half of a shelf or a little small segment would be your anime kind of titles, right? At the time, you probably didn't really know that they were really anime-ish titles because as I said, they were still, they were just sort of blended in with all the rest of the comics. So that you just think they're just like, these are independent, as they call them. And so it was not common to see a lot of manga titles. But then as anime started getting more popular, especially, when we get into, the pre-release of a lot of the anime on DVD and that kind of stuff, right? So between, let's say, about 1980, late 80s, okay, so in 1987, 88, 89, okay, and then just before they started releasing them on DVD, so 1990, 1991, 92, there was this little segment where a lot of anime manga starting, to gain a lot of popularity because it takes less time to license a manga, get it translated, and put it into like smaller comic book form. So basically, they'd take a chapter, 40 pages or so, and they'd make a comic book out of it, right? And then you'd have to buy multiple copies of this comic book. Let's say, for example, Area 88, or Guyver. And then you'd have to buy each issue in order to get like the next chapter. And then after a while, they would bundle it all together and make a, sort of a bigger graphic novel. And then you'd buy that. course, now, fast forward several years, you can go into like you don't even have to go to a comic book store now. You can actually go to a very big store like Barnes and Noble, Chapters, Indigo, that type of thing, and you'll just see a vast shelf of manga available. And this is kind of unheard of, because I said this is sort of like um, comics and that kind of stuff, which were not designed in let's say in the U.S. These are actually Japanese made, right? And just been translated into English, and then all of a sudden there's this big demand for this. And I've seen many days where go down to Metrotown, you go to the Chapters, and there's all the high school kids and all the college kids all sitting in the the aisles of Chapters, so like getting all comfortable, reading their mangas of whatever they would happen to be following, whether it's Naruto, Fist of the North Star, and the list goes on of what is available for them. Okay, so it's a big change. Okay, so the next question is, why do Japanese anime magazines cost so much in the U.S.? Okay, so this, like, even when I was buying comics and then going to like my Iguasi bookstore and even Sophia's bookstore at the very beginning, I was told very quickly and early that okay, here's a new type magazine, and right on the front cover of the new type magazine, it writes it's 400 yen. And it doesn't take much of a a braino to go to a bank and that, or anything at that time, and say, oh, well, how much is 400 yen worth? And they tell you, well, it's probably around $4 US. And then you're going, okay, but I didn't pay anywhere close to what $4 US is. When going to a Wasi bookstore or Sophia bookstore, they actually had this really complex grid, which came up with a price, based on the current exchange rate, shipping, and all that other stuff. To determine how much something is worth. And I was probably paying closer to like, $8, $9, $10, okay, for that same magazine. And the reason is because, we have to, the people who are getting the magazines, that kind of stuff, and the Japanese material are basically paying essentially the cover price for that. So let's just take the comic book example, okay? So when you go to look at a comic, let's say X-Men or something or whatever, and you look at the cover, the price, and it says, oh, okay, yeah, it says it's like $3.99 Canadian or whatever it is, okay? So that the comic book store probably bought it for like $2, okay? So the wherever the comic book store, so let's say Previews Magazine or whatever, the distributor for that, sold it to the comic book store for like $2 for that comic, so that when he puts it on the shelf and sells it for the $3.99 that's actually printed on the book cover, then at least the comic book store is making 50% profit on that, and there we go, right? And and then of course the previous chain is that obviously the publisher probably made that comic for like $1. So basically, when they put it, to the publishers and or the distribution network, they're making their cut. Okay, so I'm oversimplifying and I'm trying, I'm fudging the percentages a little bit, but I mean that's essentially how the system works, right? So that's how, when you go from the printing of the comic to the distribution of the comic to the actual putting it on the shelf at the comic book store. That's why, for example, such a like a comic of the X-Men was only like $4. You pay $4 for it, and there we go, you're done. Now the problem is that these Japanese things, right? Well, what's happening? Let's say in the case of Sophia's bookstore. I mean, obviously, if you're a big chain store like Kinokuniya and Iwase bookstore, when you order from the distribution company or from the from the actual manga book company, right? They're gonna sell it to you at a discount, obviously. So a standard 400 yen book is they'll probably sell it to you for like, let's say 200 or 300 yen. Okay, so they still make a profit when they sell it for the price that's written on the book, right? But that's in Japan, right? So these mom and pop shops, right, like Sophia's bookstore, obviously are basically getting it ordered in to their local store, shop, or whatever, they might get a little bit of a discount on it because they're not ordering volumes or anything of a certain number, or nor are they possibly having a like a home comic shop in Japan. So what they do is they'll take that, make orders of these things every month. They put them into boxes and that kind of stuff, and then they have to ship them all the way over here to North America. Okay, now that's obviously going to cost money for the extra shipping, which doesn't really happen when you're actually in Japan, right? So they may have paid $3, whatever, or like say 300 yen, $3, for that particular comic. Then they had to add on another $2 or maybe $3 or whatever for that comic to get it shipped from there over here. So now, even though it says it's a 400 yen new type, it already cost, let's say, $6, $7 to get it here, even before you put it on the shelf. So that's why places like Sophia's Bookstore and the Iwase Bookstore has a little kind of conversion chart, so that they can kind of amortize the cost of the shipping across all the books that are in there. They have a little table. Their little table basically takes account to this shipping, and it takes account to the exchange rate, because obviously the exchange rate fluctuates between the yen and the Canadian dollar / US dollar. And so they come up with this price. So all of a sudden, this 400 yen new type magazine in Japan translates to something like $12, $13. By the time you actually pay for it and actually get it here, and that's why it's so expensive. Sure. Again, if you go to a smaller, sort of maybe affiliated Japanese store, you might be able to get a couple bucks cheaper and that kind of stuff. But again, at this time, it was very rare because there's very few places that actually sold Japanese stuff, like specifically Japanese stuff. I mean, even a comic book store would mostly only carry English translated stuff. So this is like trying to get original mangas, DVDs, CDs, and that kind of stuff from Japan. The price on them is going to be significantly more expensive, just because of all this extra shipping cost, and of course literally paying for it at retail and then having to resell it at a markup off retail rather than off of your distribution price. So, but again, at this time, our anime fans were more than happy to pay for this stuff. Well, maybe not happy, but we were glad that we could get what we can get. Okay. All right. I hope you found that kind of interesting, and see what kind of environment we had. Like I said, like getting information was very, very limited, and what we talked about was kind of really narrow, because the fact that a lot of the topics that we focused, there's not a lot of people knew about a lot of different things, right? So a lot of topics were all more or less centered on some very key animes that everyone was sort of having their eyes on, right? So you can tell that by seeing some of the actually frequently asked questions. These the questions that people are always asking. Okay, so I'm going to get into more the things that I found on the internet, and elaborate more on how they relate to this particular time, as well as I got more fan letters coming up, where I've managed to find some of the very, very first people that I actually wrote to in the actually very early ages of like the 1988, 89. So even before I really started doing fan subbing, when I was just getting my feet into the CFO and into tape trading and that kind of stuff, I managed to find some of the letters to some of the first people that I actually wrote to, and so I'm going to get into those ones and kind of go into those a little bit more detail, and do some more work on that. All right, so don't forget to make sure you're subscribed below. Make sure you have your notifications on, so that I can when those episodes come out, you will know. All right. Okay, so until next time, see you again.